You ever get fined by your HOA for your 7-year-old's chalk art? No? Then count your blessings, because I did and I wasn't about to let it slide. My name's Garrett Price. I'm a mechanic, father of 2, and the not-so-proud resident of Oakmere Trails, a neighborhood that looks peaceful until you meet our HOA president, Teresa Jennings. Think platinum blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and the voice of a smoke alarm. She walks around like she owns every lawn, every curb, every blade of grass. And to her, kids are just future rule breakers. Last Saturday, my daughter, Riley, was out front with her little chalk bucket drawing butterflies, hopscotch squares, and a big smiling sun on our own driveway. Just our driveway. I was under the hood of my truck when I heard it, the sharp click of heels on pavement and the familiar screech of Teresa's voice. "Garrett," she barked, waving a clipboard like she was serving a warrant. "We have rules about defacing property." I stood up, wiping oil off my hands. "It's chalk, Teresa. It washes off. It rained 2 nights ago." She sniffed and scribbled something dramatically. Article 6, Section 4, no unauthorized markings on any exterior surface in view of the street. That includes driveways. You're kidding. I'm issuing a citation. $50. And if it happens again, I'll escalate to the board. "Teresa, it's kids' chalk art." She turned on her heel. Rules are rules. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Riley, helping her with math homework while fuming. My daughter? A criminal now? For drawing a flower? I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop. There it was, Section 4. Vague as hell. Nothing about chalk. Just unauthorized markings. But I found something else too, Section 9. Turns out the HOA only has jurisdiction over private property, not public streets. That's when the idea hit me. The next morning, I stopped by the craft store, bought every jumbo chalk pack they had. Then I called a few neighbors, ones who were fed up with Teresa's nonsense too. By noon, a dozen kids were out with Riley, and guess what we did? We turned the entire cul-de-sac into a chalk masterpiece. Dragons, spaceships, rainbows, a tribute to our mailman Frank. It was glorious. I even helped sketch a full mural of a beach scene outside Teresa's house, complete with a chalk flamingo wearing sunglasses. And I filmed the whole thing. Set up my GoPro on the mailbox and let it roll. She came storming out of her house within 20 minutes, face red, heels clicking like castanets. "Garrett, what's the meaning of this?" I waved, holding up my phone. "Hey Teresa. Just some neighborhood bonding on public property. You know the street? Section 9 says you don't have any say here. You're defacing the neighborhood. It's chalk. It washes off. And you said rules are rules, right? Well, I checked the rules." She marched straight into the middle of the street and started stomping on the artwork, kicking over chalk buckets and screaming about property values and delinquent behavior. The GoPro caught every second. By sundown, the street looked like a kaleidoscope, exploded pastel dust coating every inch of asphalt, kids giggling, parents sipping lemonade, and Teresa Jennings fuming in the center like a malfunctioning sprinkler. She didn't say another word to me that day. Just marched back into her house, hair frizzed from the humidity and heels scuffed from stomping through chalk clouds. I figured that was the end of it. A tantrum, nothing more. I underestimated how far she was willing to go. 2 days later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. Certified. Stamped with the HOA's seal and everything. Inside was a formal notice of violation, this time not just a fine, but a summons to attend a disciplinary hearing for coordinating an unauthorized event that interfered with the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity and endangered pedestrian safety. Endangered pedestrian safety. From chalk. I stared at the paper while my wife, Dana, read over my shoulder. She let out a low whistle. "She's reaching now." "Not just reaching," I said, flipping the page. "She's trying to make this official. Wants me in front of the board." The hearing was scheduled for that Friday evening in the Oakmere Trails clubhouse. I knew what this was, a show trial. She thought she could humiliate me into submission in front of the other board members and residents. She didn't realize I planned to bring my own audience. Friday arrived. I wore my cleanest work shirt and brought a flash drive, a folder of printed documents, and my daughter's chalk-covered sneakers for good measure. Dana came with me along with Frank the mailman, who had the day off and insisted on tagging along. Behind us trailed 5 other parents whose kids had drawn on the street that day. They weren't summoned, but they weren't about to let me walk in alone. The clubhouse smelled like lemon wax and desperation. Folding chairs were set up in 2 rows facing a long plastic table behind which sat Teresa and the rest of the HOA board, Carl, who nodded but never spoke, Marcia, who blinked too much and took obsessive notes, and Leonard, who wore a bow tie like he thought he was presiding over a courtroom. Teresa tapped a gavel against the table with unnecessary force. "We'll call this disciplinary hearing to order. Mr. Price, you are here to respond to charges of organizing an unsanctioned event, vandalism, and creating a public nuisance." "Before we start," I said, plugging in my flash drive to the projector on the wall, "I'd like to submit video evidence. It's about 6 minutes long. Should clarify a few things." Teresa leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "We are conducting this procedurally. You'll have time to respond after the board reviews the charges." "I understand. But this footage directly relates to the incident. And I think the rest of the room might want to see it too." Leonard looked unsure. "We suppose it's relevant." I hit play. The projector flickered to life, showing the quiet beginning of the chalk event. Kids drawing, parents chatting, Riley laughing as she traced the outline of a dolphin. It was wholesome, harmless. Then came the moment Teresa marched into frame, yelling, knocking over chalk containers, and finally grinding her heel into one of the drawings of a kitten. No one in the room made a sound until the video ended with her shouting something unintelligible and storming off screen. I turned back to the board. "This is what you're calling a public nuisance?" Carl cleared his throat but said nothing. Marcia scribbled frantically. Teresa's jaw clenched so tight I thought her molars might fuse. "Mr. Price," she finally said, voice brittle. "The board maintains that the event was unauthorized. You failed to submit an activity request form per Article 11, Section 3. I pulled a printed copy of the bylaws from my folder and set it on the table. "Correct. And that section applies only to events hosted on HOA property. The street is maintained by the city. Publicly owned." I confirmed it with the county assessor's office. Dana stood and handed them a document with the city's seal on it. "Verified. And we've brought a signed statement from Officer Mendoza of the local precinct confirming that no laws were broken and no complaints were filed." Teresa's face lost its color. "And one more thing," I said, pulling out a copy of last year's HOA budget statement. "You used HOA funds to pay for those new surveillance cameras, right?" She stiffened. "That's standard security, except they were installed without a vote. The bylaws require a community ballot for any expense over $5,000. These cost $7,000, and the contractor you used? That's your cousin's company." I did a little digging. The room buzzed. Someone in the back muttered, "She what?" Teresa stood abruptly. "This hearing is about your behavior, not mine." "Actually," I replied, "it's about abuse of authority. And I think the rest of the residents here deserve to know what's really going on." That's when Frank stepped forward, holding a padded envelope. "I have something for the board," he said. "Certified mail addressed to the HOA. From the city attorney's office." Teresa hesitated. Leonard took it. Inside was a cease and desist letter, warning the HOA leadership about overreach, misuse of funds, and failure to comply with municipal zoning ordinances when they attempted to enforce rules on public streets. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd filed a complaint. Leonard read it aloud, his voice faltering toward the end. Teresa didn't sit back down. She walked out, heels clicking softer this time, like they'd lost their purpose. The board adjourned without a vote. Outside, the air felt lighter. People clapped me on the back, kids ran circles around the parking lot, and someone shouted they were bringing sidewalk chalk to the next block party. Dana leaned against the hood of our car, arms crossed. "You planning to run for the board?" "Not a chance," I grinned. "I've got better things to do. Like help Riley draw a rocket ship on the driveway." Marcia approached later and told me quietly that 2 board members had already called for an emergency election to replace Teresa. Apparently, she tried to push through a new fine schedule without approval earlier that year, and someone else had finally decided to dig deeper. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The neighborhood had seen the footage. They'd read the city's letter. And more importantly, they'd seen how ridiculous the entire situation had become. All over a box of chalk. By the following week, Teresa Jennings was no longer answering emails. The emergency election had been scheduled for 2 Saturdays out. Flyers were quietly distributed by volunteers, not the board. No one used the HOA newsletter. People didn't trust it anymore. Instead, the community organized through a private group chat and handwritten notes in mailboxes. It was quieter that way. Less chance of interference. I was back in my garage rotating tires when a man I didn't recognize walked up my driveway. Mid-40s, pressed shirt, wore his badge clipped to his belt but didn't flash it around. He introduced himself as Detective Shane Lamont from the county's Financial Crimes Division. "I'm not here about the chalk," he said. "Mind if we talk inside?" I brought him to the kitchen. Dana gave him a glass of water and took the kids to the backyard. "Your name came up in a call from the city attorney's office," he said, setting a folder down. "They forwarded us some documentation you submitted about the HOA's spending irregularities." I nodded. I didn't dig too deep. Just enough to prove Teresa was misusing funds. "Turns out you uncovered more than you thought." He opened the folder. Inside were copies of invoices, some I recognized, others I didn't. What caught my eye was the frequency. Monthly charges going to a landscaping company called Green Trace Services for nearly double what other neighborhoods were paying. Teresa listed herself as the HOA's maintenance liaison, Lamont said. But Green Trace doesn't exist. The address on file is a P.O. box. The EIN number is real, but it's registered to a shell LLC. That LLC traces back to a checking account she controls. My stomach dropped. So she's been billing the HOA for work that never happened? Exactly. She created a fake vendor, approved her own payments, and funneled close to $80,000 over the last 4 years. That's felony embezzlement. I leaned back in my chair. And no one noticed? HOA boards rarely get audited unless someone raises a flag. Most residents don't dig through the financial reports unless something affects them directly. You poking around triggered the city attorney to review her filings. He closed the folder. "We've got enough to move forward, but I need your permission to access the footage you recorded during the chalk event. It shows her acting in an official capacity while behaving erratically. That helps establish a pattern." I agreed immediately. By the time he left, Dana had come inside. She didn't ask questions, just handed me Riley's sketchbook. She'd drawn a picture of our driveway with Teresa in the middle, arms flailing, surrounded by smiling stick figures. The next morning, 3 unmarked cars rolled into Oakmere Trails. They didn't use sirens. Just pulled up quietly and walked to Teresa's house. She opened the door in a robe and was led away without cuffs, but not before half the neighborhood saw. No one said a word. But curtains twitched and phones lit up with messages. Later that evening, Leonard knocked on my door. He stood straighter than usual, wearing a polo tucked into his jeans and had a clipboard under one arm. "I figured you should hear this from me," he said. "The board voted to suspend all enforcement actions until the election. We're freezing spending. And we're asking for residents to form an audit committee." I tilted my head. "You asking or volunteering me?" "Both." I agreed on one condition: that every document would be made public. No summaries. No edits. Every receipt scanned and uploaded for residents to inspect themselves. He shook on it. Over the next week, we discovered more than we bargained for. Teresa hadn't just fabricated vendors. She'd sold off HOA-owned tools, hedge trimmers, ladders, tricycles from the community center, and pocketed the cash through online resale accounts. We found purchase logs with serial numbers that matched listings on a local classified site. One of the older residents, Mrs. Kwan, recognized her own donated wheelbarrow in a photo. It had her initials burned into the handle. The audit committee compiled everything and handed it over to Detective Lamont. He confirmed charges would be filed. Meanwhile, 2 former board members admitted they'd suspected something for a while but had been too intimidated to speak up. Teresa had threatened to report them for dereliction of duty if they didn't comply. The neighborhood was furious. But it wasn't chaos, it was clarity. People started talking to each other more. Not just venting, but organizing. A retired accountant named Iris set up weekly open meetings in her garage with folding chairs and a whiteboard. We reviewed one HOA policy per session and rewrote them together. Someone brought coffee. Someone else brought a printer. It felt like taking back a house we didn't realize had been stolen. Election day came fast. The turnout was massive, almost double what anyone predicted. People brought their kids, their dogs, even lawn chairs. The voting was done by paper ballot, and the results were read aloud right there in the park. Teresa, of course, was disqualified the moment she was indicted. But her former allies tried to run under different names. None of them made it past the first round. A new board was elected. A teacher, a nurse, a retired Air Force pilot, a college student, and to everyone's surprise, me. I hadn't planned on running, but someone nominated me during the meeting, and before I could protest, a dozen hands shot up in support. I only accepted because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. At our first official meeting, I proposed a motion to repeal Section 4 of Article 6, the one Teresa had used to fine my daughter. The vote was unanimous. Then I proposed a community art day. Every driveway, every sidewalk, every curb. Chalk, paint, the washable kind, local artists, and kids leading workshops. I didn't have to convince anyone. The event was held with the city's blessing. They even sent over traffic cones. A local news crew showed up, interviewed Riley, and aired a segment titled From Crayons to Criminals. How one neighborhood took back their streets. The best part? Riley got to draw a 10-foot dragon across the intersection. She named it Lady Justice, and this time no one tried to stop her. 3 weeks after the election, Oakmere Trails looked and felt like a different neighborhood. Not because the houses had changed, they were still the same tidy rows of single-family homes, but because people now stood outside to talk instead of glancing over their shoulders. Morning walks turned into sidewalk conversations. Lawns that had once been silent, rural police territories were now gathering spots for chalk drawings, lemonade stands, and impromptu kickball games. But while the community was healing, the legal storm swirling around Teresa Jennings was far from over. I was in the middle of organizing supply bins for the upcoming art day when I got a call from Detective Lamont. "Garrett," he said, "thought you should know. The DA's office issued a warrant this morning. We're charging Teresa with wire fraud, falsifying records, and embezzlement from a nonprofit organization. That's in addition to the theft charges. She's being extradited from her sister's place in South Carolina. Guess she thought skipping town would slow things down." I leaned on the garage workbench, absorbing the weight of it. Is the HOA being held liable for any of it? Not the residents. But the organization as an entity will need to submit a financial compliance report. The court's appointing a forensic auditor. You might want to let your new treasurer know. It's going to be a long paper trail. That evening, I relayed the news to the rest of the new board. We met in Iris's garage, still our unofficial headquarters. Instead of folding chairs, people had brought camp stools and a few crates to sit on. The treasurer, a quiet guy named Luis who worked in IT for the school district, took the news with a calm nod. I already started digitizing the last 5 years of reports. Cross-referencing vendor names. I'll prep the files for the auditor. Iris uncapped a marker and wrote Transparency Portal in big block letters across the top of the whiteboard. Below it, she listed 3 bullet points: public access, quarterly audits, open budget meetings. As we moved on to planning the community art event, a woman named Felicia, one of the newer residents, raised her hand. What happens to the fines people paid under Teresa? The ones we now know were illegitimate. Luis looked up from his laptop. That's tricky. The HOA's account was drained, and almost all of those funds were funneled into her shell companies. It's going to depend on how much the court can recover through restitution. Best case, we file a civil suit to reclaim what we can. Felicia crossed her arms. So she robs us, and we have to pay to sue her? That's how the system works sometimes, I said. But we're not standing still. We've already frozen the accounts, and everything she touched is being audited. That's more accountability than this HOA ever had. Luis tapped a few keys and turned his screen to us. Also, I tracked down the camera vendor she used. Turns out they never received payment for half the equipment that was supposedly installed, meaning she probably falsified the invoices and pocketed the difference. Iris whistled. She was stealing from everyone and still didn't get the job done. The meeting ended with a plan to draft a formal letter to the residents explaining the charges and the HOA's next steps. Luis would handle the document uploads. Iris would coordinate the first open audit review. I agreed to contact the district attorney's office about the potential for residents to file individual claims for restitution. The next morning, I stopped by City Hall. The clerk at the records window recognized me and waved me through without asking for ID. Apparently, my daughter's chalk dragon had made me something of a local figure. The assistant DA, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara Dalton, met me in her office, sliding a thick folder across the desk. I figured you'd want to see the full list of charges, she said. We're filing under state and federal statutes. She used HOA funds to make personal purchases across state lines, which brings in the feds. Everything from airline tickets to a luxury handbag subscription service. I flipped through the folder. This is worse than I thought. She was good at hiding it. Layered transactions, fake vendors, even tried to pass off a Caribbean resort stay as a board retreat. Can we recover anything? If we win the case and her assets will be seized. That includes a rental property she owns 2 towns over. Once liquidated, the court will decide how to distribute the funds. Priority goes to restitution. I nodded. There are families in the neighborhood who paid fines they couldn't afford. Some even had liens threatened against their homes. Clara sat back. We'll do what we can. But if there's enough public pressure, the judge might authorize a victim compensation fund. Back in Oakmere Trails, word spread quickly. The board had decided not to send out official emails given the sensitivity of the trial, but neighbors talked. And for once, the gossip wasn't toxic, it was therapeutic. People shared stories about Teresa's threats, her fabricated violations, her surprise inspections. The more they talked, the more they realized how isolated she'd made them feel. And how much lighter things felt now. The community art day went off without a hitch. The city blocked off the main intersection and local businesses donated snacks and water bottles. A muralist from the community college helped the kids paint a massive landscape across the street, a tree with colorful leaves, each one signed by a different family. Riley painted a small fox curled up beneath the tree. She didn't say much, but I saw the pride in her face. This was hers. No one could take it away. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, Luis wheeled out a projector and played a short slideshow of the neighborhood's transformation. The last slide was a still from my GoPro footage. Teresa mid-rant, chalk dust in the air, with the caption "Never Again" in bold. That got a few laughs, not mean-spirited, just cathartic. A few weeks later, the trial began. It wasn't a media circus, but it did draw attention. Reporters showed up for opening arguments. The courtroom was quiet, serious. Teresa sat at the defense table in a gray suit, hair pulled back, expression blank. The prosecution laid out everything: the fake vendors, the shell companies, the falsified invoices, the diverted funds. They called witnesses former board members, city clerks, and finally, me. On the stand, I kept it simple. I described the chalk incident, the fine, the hearing, and the discovery that followed. I didn't embellish, didn't gloat. I just told the truth. When I stepped down, I caught a glimpse of her face. Not angry, not smug, just small. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 11 years with eligibility for parole after 6. She'd be required to pay restitution totaling over $120,000. Her assets were seized, including the rental property and a storage unit full of unopened luxury goods. Back home, we didn't throw a party. We didn't need to. We did something better. At the next board meeting, we passed a motion to create a permanent fund for community events, funded by voluntary donations and local business sponsorships. No more arbitrary fines. No more secret surveillance. Just people deciding what kind of neighborhood they wanted to live in. At the edge of the park, someone had painted a small plaque on the sidewalk sealed in clear resin. It read, "Let kids be kids. Let neighbors be neighbors." And beneath it, a little chalk sign, forever part of the pavement.